Hello, and welcome to Overheard, the Foreign Policy Research Institute monthly podcast that explores the national security implications of intelligence activities, irregular warfare, and political warfare. My name is Phil Vasilevsky, and I am the director of FPRI's Center for the Study of Intelligence and Non-Traditional Warfare. Today's podcast will examine how the intelligence community supports policymakers, especially the president, make decisions on national security and foreign affairs. Now, I would venture that probably nothing is more misunderstood in national security affairs than the conduct of intelligence activities. Part of the reason for this is because to protect and sell intelligence sources and methods, in other words, the way the intelligence community operates, those activities must be cloaked in secrecy. Secrecy protects them from hostile interference, but also often keeps them from being understood by the public they protect. Another reason for a general lack of knowledge about how intelligence supports America's national security system is because few universities and think tanks study intelligence activities as an academic discipline in comparison to the way they study other national security functions, such as military operations and diplomacy. Unfortunately, Hollywood and fiction writers fill in this gap, providing the general public with views of intelligence work that, while entertaining, are usually fanciful and misleading. Today's podcast is about informing you, our audience, about how intelligence really works and why that work is not an easy task. We are not going to unravel that secrecy and discuss sources and methods or anything else that would make a difficult job even harder for those in the intelligence community. But what we would like to do today is unravel some of the misunderstandings about how intelligence supports policymaking. In general terms, we'll be talking about how intelligence activities are really a cycle that starts with a policymaker's question, then tries to find an answer to that question, and finally presents that answer back to the policymaker as he or she works to decide about how to best protect our country. The best description I have ever heard of what exactly is intelligence is the following. Intelligence is knowledge and analysis designed to assist action. Well, here today to discuss how that knowledge is collected and what is analysis are two true experts in these fields. Our first guest we will be hearing from is Mr. Norman Roule. Mr. Roule served for 34 years in the Central Intelligence Agency, managing significant programs relating to the Middle East. Mr. Roule's service in the CIA's Directorate of Operations included multiple senior assignments in Washington, as well as more than 15 years of service overseas. He served as the National Intelligence Manager for Iran at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence from November 2008 until September 2017. As a National Intelligence Manager, he was the principal intelligence community official responsible for overseeing intelligence policy and activities related to Iran, to include engagement with senior policymakers in the National Security Council, the Department of State, and Congress. Our other guest is Mr. Yong, who served in the Central Intelligence Agency from 1997 to 2019. Mr. Lee held various senior leadership roles in the Directorate of Analysis. His key assignments included service as the Deputy Assistant Director for the Korea Mission Center, Chief of Korea Analysis, and as a briefer on the President's Daily Briefing Staff. Mr. Lee is also a Senior Fellow in the Asia Program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Phil. It's great to be here.
Well, Norm, let's start with you to first explain how the intelligence community decides what it is going to collect and how that collection is managed. Now, for many years, the way intelligence collection has been managed is via something known as the National Intelligence Priorities Framework, or NIPF. This is a system directed by the president for prioritizing national intelligence activities, managing risk, and assessing mission performance. There's also a document known as the President's Intelligence Priorities, or PIP, created at the National Security Council, that serves as the president's primary mechanism for identifying and providing guidance to the intelligence community on the intelligence topics and issues of highest importance to the president. So please tell us, how do the NIP and the PIP, the National Intelligence Priorities Framework, and the President's Intelligence Priorities work in real life? And how is the collection of intelligence coordinated across the 18 agencies that make up the intelligence community?
Those are great questions. So, to begin with, it's a messy world out there. There are very few problems which are new and unknown. So, the intelligence communities generally understand the types of issues they're going to be confronting at any one time. This said, these two acronyms, the PIP and the NIPIF, are incredibly important documents, and they play a powerful role in shaping the resources, the priorities, allowing us to manage risk within the intelligence agency, and helping us sort out who is going to do what within the intelligence community. In essence, each administration begins with the president and his senior most leadership. So we're talking about the national security advisor, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, and his senior most leaders saying what is going to be the most important issues for them. Now, some of these are going to be easy: China, North Korea, Russia, Iran. But once you start breaking these issues down, counterproliferation, terrorism, et cetera, et cetera. So this becomes guidance for the administration on where they hope to take policy itself. So the intelligence community now needs to know, once the president of the United States decides where he wants to take his administration, what his intelligence priorities happen to be. So we have the PIP, the president's intelligence priorities. And then we turn this into something known as the National Intelligence Priority Framework. This takes this into a framework that has multiple pieces to it, and in essence assigns this a priority so that the intelligence community can then understand how best to resource this and place these different priorities against each other as they rack and stack these issues within the intelligence community, and they compete for resources, people, money, and stuff within the IC itself, because these are finite commodities as we try to work these many problem sets around the world. And this allows us to then distribute collectors, analysts, the very fabric of the intelligence community throughout the coming year. Now, it's not just assigning resources, but allows us, in essence, to measure in theory how this plays out. So according to the process, the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to report once a year via the National Security Advisor to the president how the intelligence community has responded to these national priorities. This is important because, in essence, it does a variety of things, to include, is the American taxpayer getting its money's worth for the more than $100 billion, according to unclassified public statements, that is spent on the intelligence community every year to answer the dazzling array of complicated questions that reach the White House desk every day.
Thank you, Norm. Now, you may still hold the record as the longest serving national intelligence manager at 9 years. Could you tell our audience just what is a national intelligence manager and how do they function, at least when you were one, and what may have developed since you left that position?
It's a tough question because the position evolved considerably and probably is still evolving, and that's not a bad thing. Originally, there were only a couple national intelligence managers. They were created by the first director of national intelligence, John Negroponte, my old friend, and they were established for North Korea and Iran. And in essence, they were established to create two offices that were to pull together the intelligence community, not to undertake work per se, but to have two individuals who would be responsible for ensuring that the intelligence community worked as a team, It was aware of policymaker requirements, that policymakers could get responses to their questions expeditiously and completely, and that the D&I had a person that he or she could go to and get a complete response as to exactly what the intelligence community knew or didn't know, and could know, and when it would know an answer to a question at any given time. Uh, this was new and complicated for a variety of reasons. First, we have something, as my good friend Young would say, we have the National Intelligence Council. They are the lead analytic voice for the strategic analytic basis for the community. The CIA would say, in many ways, they are the foundation for the collectors of the community. But you have with the NIM in that construct in the beginning, a person who's meant to be kind of sort of above or beyond that. Let's just say that was a bureaucratic tussle. Now, that's not meant to be, it's a bad thing. It was just meant to be a new thing. I came into the job following a legendary and highly successful officer, Ms. Leslie Ireland, extraordinary officer. And I saw the job basically as follows. I was to know everything the policymakers needed, to the extent that if they asked me a question, I saw it in some way as a failure. Because if I hadn't been able to ensure the community answered that in advance, perhaps we hadn't communicated the requirements sufficiently. That's a pretty high bar. If I insisted upon attending every policymaker meeting, which, as you can tell, put a burr under a lot of saddles. But I did that so that when I came back, I pulled together every analyst and collector I could to, in essence, say, this is what the policymakers are doing. Analysts, what are you doing on this issue? Collectors, what are you doing on this issue right now? And how do we integrate this back and forth? I stayed in daily contact with analysts, collectors, policymakers from across the community, and it was a 7-day-a-week job. The office was deemed productive, and when James Clapper came in, he, as he has written in his book, he took a look at the structure of the office and noting that it, in essence, religiously stayed away from conducting operational activity or analysis, but instead pulled things together and made sure it represented everyone equally and fed the requirements in the product to everyone equally, and made sure everyone had a voice at the table equally. Replicated that with a series of other national intelligence managers. I think there may be, and Young may know more active, I think there are 17 or 18, and they are quite specialized to include a national intelligence manager for aviation. So they can become really quite focused on and require very careful, very specific military backgrounds that go beyond my own. As I say, this has evolved. The Director for National Intelligence, Ratcliffe, in I think 2020, shaped it a little differently. I think he brought the National Intelligence Council, which, unsurprisingly, I don't think was ever terrifically comfortable with the fact that the national intelligence managers played a larger role with policymakers, brought them a little further into the policy world and moved the NIMS back. But the NIMS remain the primary advisor to the DNI on any issue, the coordinators of all the work on a program, and bringing together the community on that program.
So, Norm, as you're describing, you were basically the conductor of an orchestra with a lot of different instruments in the intelligence community. I mean, there are different types of intelligence disciplines: human intelligence, signals intelligence, imagery intelligence, etc. Could you tell our audience, I mean, as a national intelligence manager, in general terms, what were the advantages that each of these intelligence disciplines brought you in conducting your job to answer policymakers' intelligence needs? And what were the general challenges involved in each type of collection?
Phil, one more thing. I saw myself as the waste of an hourglass. And that was important because in each way, I had to represent policymakers and the collectors and the analysts equally, and get that process working in the way that the bureaucracies would deal with each other. Because occasionally, if you had one policymaker dealing with one collector or one analyst dealing with one policymaker, they only spoke to themselves and they didn't go to the rest of the community. And that was really the basis for, why we made the intelligence community changes after 9/11. So when you talk about bureaucracies that didn't work, the reason the OD&I was created was simply to ensure that you didn't have one agency, no matter how good the people happen to be. And there's some extraordinary people showing up and saying, well, we're the best folk. And sometimes you would have situations where you would have a briefer from whatever agency it might happen to be, meeting with a policymaker, coming back and telling only their cadre or their agency what that policymaker was talking about. Now, that never happened in my world. That was anathema. In my world, we came back and we saw that the intelligence community saw what was going on in a compartmented way, and they had to respond on it on the policymaker's schedule. I think the challenge I had was occasionally agencies and policymakers wanted to deal bilaterally with each other because of tradition. And, it's comfortable for those two people or that agency. But again, it breaks down the reforms needed by 9/11 issues. What do agencies do? In theory, you have CIA, the all source agency, although State Department is also all source analysis and DIA all source analysis, but the CIA is the central intelligence agency. The CIA is also the national HUMINT manager, although HUMINT is also collected by the FBI and the military in a different way for different reasons. You have the SIGINT, the listening to data collected by the National Security Agency. You have geospatial collection, think satellites picking up optical or sensory. That's radar information, for example, collected by the National Geospatial Agency. And those are sort of the three main types of information out there. But we have some extraordinary agencies that don't always get a lot of sunshine. As I've mentioned, the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, extraordinary, small but mighty. The Navy's Office of Analysis produced some extraordinary and focused collection on naval issues that is often critical to understanding some of the most important issues before our policymakers. We have the individual organizations that are out there in the intelligence community, which your listeners can look up online, really are mighty and cheap at the price and work some terrifically long hours. And they did under my day. And if any of them are listening, they as good as this podcast is, they should turn it off and get back to work.
Thank you, Norm. And we should add that State's Office of Intelligence and Research is actually a direct descendant of the analytical section of the Office of Strategic Services that was founded by William Donovan. So they're close cousins also to CIA. Norm, we could spend hours, if not days, on this topic alone. And I want to thank you for providing our audience just a brief overview of the complicated art that is the coordination of intelligence collection. What I'd like to do now is to turn to our other guest, Yong Lee, and ask, Yong, how do analysts take all the raw information provided by the collectors that Norm is supervising and coordinating, and turn that into intelligence? I mean, why not just give all of this information to the policymakers up front for them to read and decide for themselves what it means?
Yeah, well, thanks Phil for having me here, and Norm, thank you for your comments. And I think Norm, once again, did a fantastic job of outlining everything and providing an overview of the collection picture. It is an immense enterprise. And if we did nothing but just send raw intelligence to the policymakers, that would be their full-time job, not necessarily running their departments, not necessarily advising the president and supervising and leading their workforce. So there's an information overload element as well. And it's the analyst job is all, as Norm mentioned, is all source. It's not just human. It's not just SIGINT. It's not just imagery. Enterprise that Norm just described produces tremendous amounts of data on any given topic that are prioritized according to the president's intelligence priorities and the national intelligence priority framework. And it's for the analysts, their main job is to boil down to its essence, what are the most things that the policymakers need to know? And this for the analysts to be able to do that, they need to be very clear on what are you trying to support. Phil, you hit the nail right on the head at the beginning. Unless it's actionable, it's not intelligence. It's just gossip or just trivia, right? It's just there's just useless factoid. You may be great in Trivial Pursuit, but it's not going to help anybody. We're here to answer a specific policymaker question to support the president's decision, president and the president's most closest advisors, senior advisors, decision making to protect the United States and advance U.S. national security interests as defined by the president of the United States. So to do that, we can't just go. To do that, you need to basically leave no stone unturned. And the big part of the analyst's job is judging the information and working with our operational counterparts or imagery collection or national security agency counterparts to judge the information, the quality of the information. Now, NSA will tell you that SIGINT is the source of all truth because you capture people in an ideal moment.
Now, Yong, is that because no one ever lies on the phone?
Yeah, that's right. Now, imagery analysts will tell you, pictures worth 1,000 words. Pictures don't lie. Well, except for times when it does. Anybody that's worked North Korea for a long time can say, really, we're seeing this. That alone is suspicious. So everybody has their own biases. And of course, the State Department, they're reporters as well, reporting on what's going on. Then, of course, everything's just fine. The ambassador is is under control and everything is then Washington, D.C. has nothing to worry about it. So kind of weighing all that in. And oftentimes the information is contradictory. And that's when analysts make their paychecks, earn their paychecks, and that's when the National Intelligence Officer, NIOs working in the National Intelligence Council, earn their paychecks because bring the community together to resolve these disputes. And intelligence analysis, as intelligence collection and management, is a team sport. I welcome anybody who's passionate about the mission, whether no matter what three-letter agency they represent, whether they're with the NIM or the DNI. I welcome anybody who are experts on the issue, passionate about the issue, passionate about the topic, joining the fight.
Yong, an intelligence analyst, whether they're at CIA or DIA or State Department, they receive all sources of raw information. How do they take that? How do they then weave that into a coherent and cogent picture for a policymaker? What's the art and what's the science in that? Or is it just an art or is it just a science?
Well, some people will call it science. It's social science, and social science by definition is not really a science. That's a qualitative field. But what is science is the scientific method, and that's something that that's you don't have to. That's who's the father of the scientific method? It's Francis Bacon, and it goes all the way back to that about having a theory and testing your theory to see and trying to challenge it to see if you're wrong. That goes for everything. That's probably whether you're following traffic directions, on maps or ways, just testing that theory. And that's important to do. And what makes people do that is that to be experts in their field, to really have time on target. Everybody can make a contribution because one trap that experts fall into. They fall into the expertise trap of saying, "Oh, kind of blowing things out. We've seen this before. We've seen this before." And there's been some spectacular intelligence failures in history of the U.S. diplomacy and foreign policy, even just since the end of the Cold War, just because of this. I remember in my training course, Iran being the classic case study, where the Iranian Revolution in 1979, it's like, oh, the Shahs managed this before, Shahs managed this before, Shahs managed this before. Well, he kept it until he couldn't manage it anymore, and everything fell apart.
Just to say, a point of contact, there were no surprises during a particular mission manager's tenure. Just want to throw a footnote out there, Young. Please continue. Thank you. Please, I was probably around then too.
So it is, once again, it is an art, and you cannot replace time on target. Nothing builds credibility like talking to a policymaker and you have time on target. I remember at a HIPSI hearing, I said, I deliberately put this in to let them know I know what I'm talking about. It says, combined time in PhD study and now time at the CIA. I've been studying North Korea for 25 years. And so, at the time, I think I was like in my 40s, more than half my life. And that kind of set the tone. It's like, it builds your credibility. Nothing builds analyst credibility more than time on target, because your expertise undisputed. Policymakers may not like what you have to say, but they respect the expertise. But once again, right off the bat, brand new analysts who may not have time on target, they can make an impact because they really do bring a new perspective. And you do get some fresh insights. And it's not always welcome because an expert doesn't like to be challenged. But it forces you to be open-minded when you have people who are non-experts. So I think one of the things that I found useful is that when I was studying a North Korea problem, I'd actually used to talk to my Syria analyst colleagues, or Libya analyst colleagues. And talking to them, they have such a different perspective while they're also covering authoritarian regimes, but they just help so much more. So once again, it's that team sport, it's that expertise, but all based on, thanks to Sir Francis Bacon and the scientific method of designing social inquiry, that you're very specific on your questions and very clear on why you're asking these questions. Once again, for analysts, is to provide actionable intelligence to policymakers to advance U.S. strategic goals and national security objectives, not just idle curiosity.
Okay. Yong, then explain to me and to our audience here, what are some of the major challenges in intelligence analysis? I mean, why then isn't it easy to figure out what someone like Osama bin Laden or Vladimir Putin or even an organization like OPEC is getting ready to do next?
Mm-hmm. Human beings are enormously complex. And I think some of the shortfalls, it's easy to say it was a failure of imagination, but that is actually the best description. There is a failure of imagination, even among someone who is most steeped in deep expertise. And we bring to the issue all our biases, and I think the biggest bias we bring to any issue is a cultural and personal bias. And I'm not saying that we're biased against individuals, nations, or ethnic groups. We tend to have a tendency to mirror image. This is one thing I noticed with analysts across all government agencies. Tend to emphasize and mirror image what makes sense to a 21st century American mind trained in political science and international relations at top universities. Most of the world, in fact, majority of the world, do not think in those terms. One of the most recent examples I had was discussing with various experts Russia invasion of Ukraine. In an expertise forum similar to this in late 2022, late 2021, I said, it just as a military analyst looking at the disposition of forces, I think Putin's going to go in, and this is not in just a this is not just an invasion force to take a small chunk of territory. I said this is an occupation force. There are like 300,000 guys on the field, and that's what we had at the height of the surge in 2006 in Iraq. And all the Russia experts pushed back. All the Ukraine experts pushed back, and they said and what they kept saying again and again and again, it doesn't make sense for Putin to do this. So I said, look, I don't know Putin. I've never covered Russia, but I've been covering North Korea for most of my adult life. And let me tell you, the Kim family, Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, its dad before them, and Kim Il-sung, the grandpa before them, they do not think like you and me. They do not think in realist or neo-realist school of IR thought where starting a war against your neighbor doesn't make sense. And I think people often forget that it's when you're Osama bin Laden or when you're someone like Vladimir Putin, who's been in absolute charge of a nuclear power for the last 20 years, it warps your thinking. You don't look at the world the way I would look at it, Phil would look at it, the way Norm would look at it.
Yong, that's an interesting point, and I'd like to expand on it a little bit more, especially your point about cultural bias and mirror imaging. We often hear also about the rational actor theory. Now, what is rational for a dictator, no matter what culture he's from, especially one who may not be from the Western tradition of thought, as you mentioned, 21st century Americans, who've been influenced by the Reformation, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, as our culture is. So could you expand on that? What's rational for some of these dictators, and why does it seem irrational to us?
So we'll take North Korea as an example. Well, one of the questions we get asked, why are North Koreans, their people are starving, they don't have any money. Why are they spending all this money investing in nuclear weapons and missiles? And I always said, because their people are starving, and without it, they'd be irrelevant. North Korea without nuclear weapons or missiles it'd be called Laos. It's just another poor, starving third world country, and it wouldn't get the kind of attention it's getting. And once again, this is where the expertise comes in. You look at the Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Il-sung, Kim family dynasty. It's closer to a cult than a nation state. Some of the most innovative and interesting papers that I read on North Korea were actually written by Catholic religious scholars and South Korean historians who study medieval Korean kingdoms. So it was actually written by a priest at Old Dominion University, this paper, comparing North Korea, how all the characteristics of a religious cult. And the most important thing is that it's better for the people to actually not exist. Doesn't come close and saying it's better for you to not exist. It's kind of that Jonestown massacre, that cultish behavior. It's better for you to not exist, die, than to live in a world without the great leader. And the medieval Korean scholar, South Korean medieval scholar said, you don't have to go to the archives. You look north of the DMZ. That is what a feudal Korean kingdom looked like. And that those kind of mindset is extraordinarily difficult, especially for our policymakers and decision makers who went to the best schools, type A personalities, who've achieved in business and government and military service, that it's hard to wrap their heads around that this is not a problem they can solve the way they solved all the problems that led to that point in their career.
Now, Yong, on that point, I'd like to transition. So far in our podcast, we've been talking about how intelligence is created from the collection through the analysis. Now, how do you explain this intelligence? How do you explain this answer to their questions to policymakers? How easy or hard is it for intelligence to matter when it moves from the intelligence world where it had been formed to the policy and political world where it must be used? What's your experiences on this as a presidential decision daily briefer?
There are times I was briefer on the PDB staff. I was one of the daily White House briefers in the last 2 years of the Bush administration. working very closely with the Director of National Intelligence at the time. And there are times when I thought, wow, really, this is how the sausage is made. And I was shocked. And how really, and it kind of gets a little, and getting a little, I got a little nervous from an organizational perspective, where the President of the United States and his advisors are making really serious policy decisions based on the intelligence and information provided. And that was really, that was inspiring to realize how important your job is. But that's at the presidential level. At the day-to-day U.S. government level, the biggest challenge becomes when talking to policymakers is that policymakers tend to think everybody thinks they're an analyst. They're well read. They're thinking, why? I've been reading The Economist, and they come in with their own biases, and it's really hard sometimes to try to move people away from long-held beliefs. It's really difficult to try to move people away from what is their worldview. And people are pretty well tied to it, and it's hard. Especially, it's hard to get people to the point that there are some problems that cannot be resolved. It just can be best managed. I think North Korea was the classic example, because the solution is kind of unpalatable. You can either force the North Koreans to give up nuclear weapons, or you can deal with them, and it's always end up not making the unpalatable decision. So kind of dealing with the preconceived notions, we all have biases, and that's the biggest issue. It's people's preconceived notions, biases, and at every level, and that exists at every level. So it can be exhausting. But toward the second half of my career, I had a chance to do numerous Oval Office briefings and Oval Office meetings with President Bush, President Obama, and President Trump. And at the point, it becomes worth it when you see where the rubber meets the road, and it becomes exhilarating. And especially when you feel like you can't tell anybody, but you go home, you may be stuck in traffic on the toll road or the beltway, but my God, you helped advance American national security, and it makes it all worth it. But it's enormously frustrating trying to convince each layers of the U.S. government.
Well, I have just one final question for both of our guests, and Norm, I'd like to turn to you first. And we've been talking about intelligence activities as a cycle, where you get the question from the policymaker, it is collected, it is analyzed, and the answer is brought back to the policymaker to see if it will help with what he or she has to do. How can that intelligence cycle we've been discussing, how does it work optimally? And why sometimes does it not work optimally? And we've all three have seen, I think, cases of both.
I have watched intelligence stop wars, save lives, stop terrorist events. I have watched intelligence move negotiations in very productive directions. People have often asked what I'm proudest of. As I've watched the team of heroes, as Yong correctly stated, the team sport play out. And the answer I've often given is nothing, because a lot of nothing is a wonderful thing. It's when something happens, it's usually a bad thing. But when nothing happens, it's usually a really good thing. When no war happens, no one dies, not that ship didn't sink, that guy was able to go home to their family. That was a good thing, good day. And I watched a lot of amazing nothing happen because of extraordinary intelligence. When things didn't happen, it was usually when the system didn't work the way it was supposed to. When it wasn't. It was just the parts were all there, the people were all there, the goodwill was all there, the brains were all there, the money was all there. It's just that bad luck. It's just things just didn't come together. I've also sat in front of policymakers who, as Young said, sometimes, you have to, they have to be told this is a dread disease that can't be cured. It can be managed, the symptoms can be treated, but there is no cure for this. This is the people on the other end of your problem just don't want to be reasonable, and your options aren't going to be the pleasant ones that you would like to hear. And in fact, I don't want to go on too long, but I've always thought that the worst thing that I faced in a policymaker was what I call religion, where they really believe that they can get something done. And my answer is, look, I've only got facts from multiple reliable sources and extraordinary analysts who, as Young said, have many years of time on target. And we've looked at this 5 or 6 different ways, and it's not going to happen. And then they go in and, it's just not going, it just doesn't happen. So sometimes, it's just too much belief in something that isn't there. And I don't mean to be demeaning to any of our policymakers. They have the hardest job in the world because we have the luxury of not having to make these impossible decisions, or I did when I was in the intelligence community. We all did, but they have that difficult job. But over to Young for his brilliance.
I don't know if it's brilliance, but I kind of come back to that being the daily White House briefer, and we briefed 6 days a week during the Bush administration, and every day going to the White House, it was something very special. And there are moments like, oh, okay, here we go. Gotta get up at midnight. I lived in suburban Virginia. I get up at midnight, get to the office at like 1 a.m. and start just going through the traffic and see what's going to be in tomorrow's book. But I gotta say that there are days when I came out of when I was going home around 10 a.m. after I came back from the White House. It just like, a couple of times my chest was bursting with pride, and other occasions I just had a little tear roll down my eyes because what an extraordinary things the intelligence community was doing. American people will never know about it, but just the sacrifices that people were making on behalf of the United States, it was awe-inspiring. I joined the CIA. When the recruiter asked me, why do you want to join the CIA? I said, I just would like to do something to give back to a country that I feel like has given so much, given everything to me and my family. And I feel like I saw that in action. I was part of it, very small part. And that really, really, made my heart grow. And as Norm said, there are extraordinary things that we were able to get done in the second half of my career, toward the end, leading the Korea department, where we really helped protect Americans, protect our allies, and protect our national interests and our national reputation. And it's priceless. It's priceless. Although the Kim family dynasty has managed to outlast me, I left before Kim Jong-un did.
Well, Young, that'll be the last word. And I want to thank you. Norm Roule, Yong Lee, thank you. This has been a great discussion. I hope for you, our audience, this has been a useful podcast to understand how intelligence is created and how it helps policymakers do the job, and the difficulties both the intelligence community and the policymakers have in doing those jobs. And also for our audience, thank you for listening to Overheard to get different perspectives on intelligence activities, irregular warfare, and political warfare. We hope you'll continue to listen and recommend us to your friends. If you enjoy these podcasts, please visit the Foreign Policy Research Institute website at fpri.org to subscribe to our mailing list to receive updates on future podcasts and other FPRI events. Please also consider becoming a member of FPRI and donating to it to support our efforts to provide the public and policymakers with fact-driven, nonpartisan analysis about the most pressing foreign policy and national security issues facing the United States. We hope you will join us next month for a new Overhead podcast. Goodbye.